it'd be great if you want to start and just kind of tell us a little bit about this project and how you came to dive into Mark as a character and sort of where you started. What was your origin story with this?
I had been doing documentaries for a while. I was finishing up my feature documentary, Woman on Fire, which is about the first openly transgender firefighter in New York and a pioneer for LGBTQ rights. And I wasn't sure what project I was going to do next. And I actually wanted to do narrative filmmaking and thought that's what I would be doing. And then, something about the issue of climate change just started to get under my skin more and more. And maybe just like listening to the Democracy Now! News program all the time, where it's just like, the world's on fire. Like, this is such an urgent issue. And then seeing Donald Trump's rise to power and feeling like, as a documentary filmmaker, like I needed to sort of reckon with all these things. So I sort of put my desire to do like a narrative mumble core film on hold and was thinking about politics and thinking about climate change. And around that same time, a friend of mine was always posting about Mark Baumer. He was on this walking barefoot across the country to protest climate change. And somehow, like, he took a lot of the energy that I was feeling and embodied it in this perfect way with like his wonderful sense of humor but also the urgency of what he was doing, the sort of performance art aspect of what he was doing. And I just really latched on to his videos and became a fan because my friend was always posting his videos. She and I went to the University of Pittsburgh together, and then she met Mark at Brown University and became good friends with him. So Mark Baumer was a friend of a friend. I followed him on Facebook and Twitter and kind of hoped to maybe collaborate with him one day. I watched Mark's video responding to Trump's inauguration, and I really felt like right alongside Mark's energy in the film, you see like the diatribe that he puts out there. And I was like, at least Mark's out there fighting for us. And then I go on Facebook and I see all these posts like, we'll miss you, Mark, forever. And I saw that he died, and it just kind of like hit me, my heart kind of stopped. And then I was just, found myself bawling my eyes out over this person I never met, and sort of realized just that the power of the symbolism of, Trump rising to power and losing this really powerful activist on the same weekend, feeling like it was really wrong that Mark died. He had a lot more to say and a lot more to give. Very quickly, as a filmmaker, I'm like trying to problem solve through the limited skills that I have. And I'm just like, can I help his family make a commemorative film about his life? Like, maybe I could offer that. Um, and so that's kind of how the idea came to me. And then I reached out to the mutual friend that I had with Mark. She put me in touch with the family, and I kind of started to earn their trust from there. And we went on to collaborate on the film.
A point that you brought up that I kind of want to talk about a little bit more was your reaction to his passing and not knowing him. It seemed like the similar reaction as the writer from the New Yorker who you interviewed said that had that sort of same sentiment. Was she kind of representing you in that moment as well?
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. When I was interviewing her, I was just like, that's, my, we're the same archetype of just like, the nerdy journalist watching from the sidelines and feeling impacted. But Mark's work really had that kind of effect. I think it had the humor of it, the sort of transcendent, Zen quality of being in the moment, being on the road, how he kind of had that disarming personality where he draws you in. And, activism can often be kind of intimidating to engage with or very serious. And Mark made everything so approachable and kind of light, and I appreciated that. So I think it's a testament to the power of his art. He created over 100 videos of himself on the road with just like a GoPro, and then he was using his cell phone and walking 15 miles a day or whatnot, and directing and editing and posting these videos every single day that made his audience feel like they knew him, even if they didn't. So it's, he was blogging and tweeting and doing a lot of other things too at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, gave you so much material. I mean, we had a question from one of our students that was, What was it like gathering and going through all of the childhood footage and pictures? But I even want to expand on that. What was it like going through all of that? Like, there's just had to be such a volume that you had to really comb through, and what was that process like?
So I edited the film as well as directing it. And, I like to have everything transcribed. So I had all of Mark's videos, the 100 videos from the barefoot walk, all of that transcribed to kind of comb through. And he was also a prolific YouTuber. So there were like maybe 500 videos on the YouTube channel spanning a decade. We went to his parents, who just kind of handed over a cardboard box of all the VHS tapes from Mark growing up and their photo albums that we had to really handle with care. It's like there's one copy of this thing. And so it was nice too, because we were able to digitize all the VHS tapes and give the DVD and, the download to his parents as well. But what was interesting about Mark's past was like he was kind of this clean cut kid, this athlete who then, this jock perhaps, who then became this hippie on the road kind of character. And so I think people, when they watch the movie, are really surprised to see his evolution. I mean, it's consistent. He's always been an athlete, and the walk is an extension of that too. But yeah, the archival is sort of invaluable in helping to understand like how his love of nature originated, and also the athleticism and the origins of his interest in performance art. And so I really like that, just from like a psychological point of view of understanding how he got to be who he became. So in all my documentaries, I tend to like follow one character and go into their past to understand them better.
You mentioned Mark's parents. That was actually a question that one of our teaching artists has was how did you handle the delicate process of getting Mark's parents' permission, and what was it like working with them on the film and then during the release as well?
When Mark died, I guess it was January 21st, 2017, and pretty quickly after I learned that news, I had the thought of trying to make a film about his life, particularly because I was such a fan of his videos, and I was like, people need to see his video work, and how's that going to happen? His legacy needs to be preserved. But wanting to be sensitive, I had no idea how to decide when to approach his parents. I gave it a few weeks, and then I started to notice all the news coverage coming out around his death in the New Yorker and the New York Times and whatnot. And it was clear from that his parents were granting interviews. And so then it's like, well, now I probably should reach out, because someone else might reach out before I do with the same idea. And sure enough, by the time I reached out to them, they had been contacted by a few other filmmakers, and they had already started to engage with another documentary filmmaker. They ended up choosing me over them for a few reasons. One was because we had, the mutual friend in common, and I was really a fan of Mark's work before he passed. And another one was because the other filmmaker was actually like a bigger filmmaker than me and was kind of outsourcing labor. And so like they were just kind of like going through their secretary and whatnot. So they liked the more sort of personalized thing. And they're pretty progressive people, and I think they wanted to like support like a young woman filmmaker and a lot of things like that. So then in March, I ended up flying out there, and I stayed at their house, which is something that I've sometimes done when working closely with folks. Like, hey, if you have a guest room, I'll stay there, and then we'll really get to bond, And so we did that, and I also flew out the cinematographer that I work with, and we had a local PA on set. This is going from Pittsburgh to Maine to visit with them. And it was just like a great visit. Like it was, we had a few phone calls, so we got to know each other over the phone, but then getting there and having meals together and doing the interviews, we could just kind of tell right away that we all got along and we had the same goals for the project. So it was very organic, and his parents, as you can see in the film, are very similar to Mark in their values. So it wasn't a stretch to collaborate with them.
What was their reaction like seeing the film on a big screen? And what was yours? What was your reaction like in that experience as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think they've been really supportive all through the process. They've been really happy with how it turned out. We premiered the film at the Heartland International Film Festival in Indianapolis, and it won Best Premiere, and they were very honored by that. We played it here in Pittsburgh at the Three Rivers Film Festival, so they got to come to like a packed house, screening for that. And there's nothing like being in a movie theater with like as a filmmaker showing work. And if you're involved in the making of a film, even if there's 10 or 20 people in that audience, it feels really meaningful, versus like some of these more online screening events and festivals. It's a little bit hard to feel the same connection. So I'm really glad that they had those experiences in 2019 before COVID hit and everything. But they've been really happy with the film. They've watched it a number of times in the theater on their own, and they see it as like a very accurate sort of, commemorative film about their son.
That's great. I mean, I I watched it again. I watched it in the theater, which was amazing, and then I watched it again in preparation for this week, and I just was really watching it through the lens of a parent. I feel like this time, and like what an amazing thing to have to memorialize your child. Like they'll have that forever. You gave them such a gift, and I would be eternally grateful for something like that. It seems the impression that I got was that they really feel that way, and so it's such a great thing you were able to provide to them. So kudos. That's like, wow, it's amazing. I think it's so great.
Thank you. Yeah, and I'm glad that they see it that way too. And film subjects give you so much when you're a documentarian. It's like they're not getting paid to be in the film. They're giving you tons of time out of their workday. It's very emotional to be interviewed for hours upon hours. You don't know what it's going to come out like. You don't know if you should trust the filmmaker and the editing. And so it takes a really big leap of faith for them. And then, they, as the film subjects, do a lot of press when we release the film. They have to be interviewed over and over again about it. So they're very patient and giving people as well. So for me, it's always been really important to find the right collaborators to embark on these sort of multi-year projects with, because you're in it for the long haul with that kind of a relationship, and you make friends for life out of projects like this too.
That's a great segue. We had a question that came up in the chat from Gigi, our student, who asked about how long you were staying with them when you were there.
Yeah, I would just kind of be there for a few days at a time, mostly working here in Pittsburgh to do sort of the research and planning and editing, but just doing these shorter production trips. So like going out with the crew for 5 days, maybe, where we would fly and then rent a car and drive, from Rhode Island, interview a few people, drive over to Maine, interview Jim and Mary. Stuff like that happened a lot. There weren't really a ton of shoots. We kind of, we would just do these really long shoots where it would be like in one day, I would sit down with Mary Baumer, Mark's mother, for like 3 hours before lunch, and then another 2 hours after lunch. It's like kind of grueling. And then even maybe get some B-roll after that. And then the next day do the same thing with Jim Baumer, like these really long interviews. And we just, probably did maybe 3 of those with the parents each. And then with all the other subjects, I believe it was just like one interview, one day with each, and then getting the B-roll or the verite stuff with them, at these different commemorative events that you see in the film. But a lot of it with this film, it's so different than other films that I've made because the main subject is deceased. So I'm not following them around with a camera. I'm using all of Mark's self-shot videos as the sort of spine of the film.
So Max said I thought it was filmed like you were following him around in real time. That's really interesting. Yeah, have to agree. It was really cool. So another question. This is actually one of Max's questions that he had sent earlier. What was your plan when you were starting out? How did you initially want the film to end, and how did that change along the way?
Oh boy, that's a great question. I had so many different ideas for the film. Like at one point I wanted to interview just like everyone Mark ever met. And, there was actually this memorial event at Brown University right after Mark died where I saw footage from it, and it had just like 30 different people from Mark's life all get up and say something. And that was just like, as the filmmaker, I was like, oh, I could interview all of these people. They all have something to say and contribute. But then through talking to my producers that I work with, they were encouraging me to just kind of go tighter with just a few people who were kind of key and just go deeper with those folks. So that was one sort of thing I was thinking early on. And I think I knew pretty early on that I wanted it to be linear, like having been a fan of Mark's while he was alive. I wanted people watching to have that same sort of connection that I had to his work and to just kind of feel his presence. And so that's why I kind of had it be linear, where you're like going from like day one of his journey to the end. And within the world of the film, he doesn't die until the third act. We could have brought his death more into it early on, but that was a conscious decision to not do that.
Throughout the documentary, like I picked up people were saying he was or he wanted to. And I was like, wait, this is past tense. Did something happen to me? Was that like intentional to build suspense? Because like the whole time I was like, oh no, is something gonna happen to him? Or was that just because people were talking about him post-mortem? So like you didn't really like, were you trying to build the suspense, or was that just something that happened to like be filmed that way and you couldn't change it?
It was a mixture, for sure, of both of those things. Like it's hard to totally control what documentary subjects are going to say. So they use different tenses at different times. And, you're already asking documentary subjects to like, please pretend I'm not here and restate the question I pose, within your answer. And so occasionally it was just like, okay, this is the footage we have and they speak in the past tense and we're going to use this anyway. But mostly I had enough footage to work with that it was mostly conscious decisions of like, okay, they're speaking in past tense here. And I think it still works because it creates a little bit of tension. And we definitely wanted tension created through the film. Like I don't know if you remember the moment in the film where Mark stops and reflects on the dead turtle. And he's like, I hope I don't get dead too. And so there's a lot of very intentional editing with creating those omens of sorts.
Yeah, I definitely like the whole time I was like, oh, I don't want something bad. He was like a sunflower, and I'm like, oh no, like something bad's gonna happen. Something bad's gonna happen. The other question I had was, you were talking about like when you came onto the film. Something I was really curious about was you had like footage from like when they buried his ashes. Were you there for that like initially, or was that like something you recreated for the sake of the documentary?
It's interesting. We get this question a lot, and that was the real ceremony. The parents, I started talking to them in February 2017, and then we did our first shoot in March, and we had started to really grow close very quickly. And they said, we're doing like a memorial service for Mark where we're burying his ashes in May. So that was the real ceremony. And they have a whole family plot there, and it's a beautiful cemetery, as you could see there, and very emotional scene. But that was real, and it's definitely a real honor to be let in that way to something so serious. But that was the event.
Maddie had said in the chat that she thought it was interesting when he said something about the way he would die from a car specifically. It was interesting how a non-narrative could foreshadow like that.
I also got nervous because like he was walking through Florida, which is typically a conservative place, and he was yelling out his like political views. And I was like, what if like someone that is like a Trump supporter like attacks him or something? Because like I was literally shaking watching that. I was like I mean, maybe it's just because like I'm 5'2", I'm like weak. So like I'm afraid to like walk alone on a street no matter what. But I could not imagine yelling out my political views where people don't agree with me. Like I would feel terrified, and I was like, oh no, like I was so afraid someone would come up to him and like start like attacking him. And I was just like, oh, it had me like on the edge of my seat. And I just, the suspenseful, like the score at that point, it started like getting bad, and I was like, what's gonna happen? It was very captivating though.
Well, thank you. Yeah, and I feel the same way that you do. I'm a very risk averse person, so I can't even imagine walking on the side of a busy road for, 15 minutes. It would freak me out. But and as far as the political situation, even just in the last few weeks, has been such at a fever pitch that, like you're saying, like, can you imagine being out there provoking people and screaming your views? And it certainly, like, we wondered about that. I think everyone wondered, like, was this the fact that he was killed, was that politically motivated? Did this driver know? We don't really have any evidence to suggest that. All the sort of facts are in the film about that. Otherwise, we would have certainly suggested that if it had been politically motivated or, super intentional or something.
Do you think that in current situations with like the nation coming together to get Trump out of office, and now we have a new president who is like more sympathetic towards the cause? Because I watched this after Trump was voted out of office. So do you think that like now it has a different perspective and an impact versus what it did when it was initially created?
We haven't really been as active, like, I mean, showing it now that with COVID and everything, we're still showing it at film festivals, but we're not able to be in an audience with people to kind of gauge the mood in the same way as when we were showing it in 2019 and people are wondering, is Trump going to be reelected? And I think there was an advocacy piece to like showing the film and be like, the film presents Trump as a character foil to Mark and as sort of the virtual nemesis of the film. And there is a sort of message of like, please don't reelect this person. And now that he hasn't been reelected, maybe the film in some ways feels kind of sweeter, like there was some sort of justice served. And I was just like watching an interview with the folks from the Sunrise Movement. And I feel like they're saying that Joe Biden is starting to deliver on campaign promises and things feel like they're headed in the right direction, but he still needs to be kind of pressed on more radical changes, like a Green New Deal type of transformative legislation. And I think that's where Mark would probably stand on it. He would probably align with the Sunrise Movement folks, if I had to guess.
But it's really bittersweet, I think, because it's also like, man, I wish that he could have been here to see that happen.
Yeah, I felt like, when Trump in the movie is, it's the footage of him pulling out of the Paris Climate Accord and like just everything that's happening, like it just made me feel so sick. And in a way where like during that time, like in real life, like me living it, it's kind of like, I mean, of course it made me feel sick, but it was also just like every single day, like something, just like the worst was happening where it's almost like I just expect it, not that I'm like cool with it and like dismissive of it, but like now that it's just like not my reality, like it just made me feel like just as sick or like even sicker. Like it brought me back to those like horrible feelings. So not in like a way that, your movie didn't make me feel bad, but it was just like a really good reminder of like that was reality. And like thinking about things in hindsight, it felt very different.
It was a traumatic experience. I feel like we'll be feeling that for a while. I apologize if there are any Trump supporters on the line, but it was traumatic 4 years for many of us, and we're still reeling, right?
When I was watching it was my first time watching it, and I remember hearing about him doing that, but I didn't know his name or anything. And by the end of the movie, I was like sitting there sobbing because like I felt so connected to him, and I've always kind of been drawn to like climate change and environmental issues. So seeing this person die, and then like it was also just so interesting, like how the car, like just all of it, the way that it like swerved, it like almost looked like it was on purpose. But like you said, there's no evidence for that. But it was just like a very like Meg was saying, like it's kind of a reminder, like not only like that was our reality, but also like reminding us that we made it through that. And so I think it not only captures Mark's story very well, but it captures kind of everybody's story in a way.
That's a really interesting comment too, because it does kind of feel like a little time capsule that of what we all did go through. Yeah. I got various comments while I was working on the film. Some people thought I should, include more Trump. Some people thought less. And it was really hard to navigate that because, you could tell Mark's story without going into these little clips of Trump saying his piece. But ultimately, it just kind of felt like we needed to have that character foil show what Mark was up against and remind people within the world of the film what he was up against at that time.
I'm just curious, Julie, did you have any negative backlash from that? Did you get any comments from the other side?
Interesting.
You don't have to answer that if you don't.
Well,
that was just top of my brain spewing that out. So
no. I mean, my first thought was like, no, not really. And then I'm just trying to kind of go back and think. And we've certainly had people in the audience who are Republican and who had a respect for Mark coming out of watching the film and a respect for his love of the environment, even if they don't agree with his politics. Online, like some of the places where I've been interviewed or the film has been featured, there have been comments in the boxes of just denigrating stupid hippie, blah, blah, that's not going to change anything, or climate change denialism. We've seen some of that in the comments, but nothing too overwhelming beyond that.
That's good. Yeah.
When Mark was killed and his story went viral initially, there were trolls. There were right-wing media figures who covered the story in a very hateful way. There were comments on his YouTube videos. So I think that wave of negative attention was bigger than when we released the film.
Well, kudos to you for filtering that out too, and not making that, giving that any attention that it didn't deserve. Yes. Well, actually, one of our questions from one of our teaching artists was about compiling things like news sources and that kind of media footage, just literally getting the footage. Did you have any roadblocks that you faced with that?
Definitely. Yeah. This is the first film that I've made that has this level of news footage integrated into it. And the two producers on the film, Olivia Vaughn and Danny Yord, they're amazing. They work at Animal, and were by my side through this whole process. But one thing that they kind of said in the beginning was just make your rough cut edit and be free to put whatever you want in there, and then you'll get your feedback, and then you can kind of rein things in. And so initially I had probably even more election coverage and Trump coverage. And then I kind of refined it down. And I thought at one point that I had the cut that was going to be, finalized, ready to color, ready to move on to audio post-production. And we passed on to the lawyer who looks at fair use issues, and she didn't approve a lot of our clips. And that kind of sent me into a panic. And what I ended up needing to do was to contextualize those news clips better by having my original footage set up those fair use clips. So the rule is if I have Trump saying I'm pulling out of the Paris Climate Accord, I can't just throw that into my film. I need Jim Baumer first saying oh, and then Trump did, this terrible thing for the environment. And then Trump says his piece. So my original footage needs to set it up. And so that actually then, made me need to go out and get more interview footage so that I could better contextualize the news footage. And it took a long, long time to make the film. It took 3 years to make it. And I thought it was going to take 2. So there's always hiccups when you're making documentaries.
So we got something in the chat that Miles put in there. Regardless of political views, I thought for anyone who has respect for themselves can have respect for the film and his message, as it greatly showed what he cared about and how he worked for it in a great way.
Yes, I really admire his dedication, and I aim to feel that passionately about things in my life, but I'm probably too rational and scared.
Yeah.
Trying to be braver. That's part of what Mark's story is about, I think, even though there is a cautionary aspect of it. I'm also inspired by his courage. And just an interesting tidbit. So he walked over 700 miles completely barefoot on this walk. And at the time that he died, like his feet were fine. They were not the problem. And he was well on his way to completing the walk. Like his feet probably wouldn't have stopped him. And if he had done it, he would have, achieved the world record for barefoot walking. He would have broken the record.
Some of my favorite parts was that you included like showing people stopping and like giving him shoes and food. Like I just thought that was really nice to add and kind of like contrast what like Trump was saying and what could have been like just a very negative place, and then just adding that in.
Thank you. Yeah, that's one of my favorite things too, just to see the kindness of strangers. Like it's not all just beware on the road. He did receive a lot of kindness. And back in 2010, he successfully walked across the country with shoes from Georgia, Tybee Island, Georgia to Santa Monica, California in 81 days. So that should probably be in the film, but there were a few reasons why we cut that out. I think maybe to just kind of make the barefoot walk look all the more that, heroic. And it was just somehow hard to like, be like, oh yeah, he did a walk before and to find a place to say that, but he did. And a lot of like how he completed that first walk was just the kindness of strangers offering him water and ride. Occasionally he'd have to get a ride somewhere if he got kind of lost in the desert.
Was there any major technical, like not like malfunction, like problem that you ran into, and like how did you get around that?
There was something with one of the interviews we did with Blake, the writer friend of Mark's, which should have been one of our easier ones because we flew the film subject from where he lives in Atlanta, Georgia to Pittsburgh to be interviewed. So it was like on our own turf. But something went wrong with one of the cards, and the SD cards where it just like had a malfunction, and we like lost some footage, and we paid like a few $100 to just recover like 10 minutes of footage. So that was really annoying. But nothing major. We had the shoot where we filmed Anna Hayward, the New Yorker writer. She lives in Chinatown, and like her, apartment is like, you have to walk up like 5 flights of stairs or whatever to get there. And that was really tough on the crew with all of the gear. And it was like a really early morning shoot. And we had just, we had to drive like 7 hours to get there and then walk up all these stairs with the gear. So that was tough. Filmmaking is really physical sometimes.
How did you get it into theaters? How did you go from a documentary filmmaker just on this, like not just on the streets, but like just out there, to getting it in theaters all around the country?
That's a great question, and something I had to learn along the way. When I first started making documentaries, I was making a lot of just short stuff, on my Sony Handycam, just cheaply, whatever I could do, kind of DIY one woman crew style. And I would just like throw them up on YouTube and just send them around to my friends and try to get them seen that way. And then when I attempted my first documentary feature and really spent the time to try to get grant funding and have a crew and be like more professional about it, I had a rough cut of that film. And then I had to get mentorship about exactly what you're saying. Like, how do I get this in theaters? And the path that you end up taking is typically to go through film festivals. So then you submit the film to film festivals and, plan a tour, and, the rate of how many you get into. I mean, it depends on how prestigious they are and everything else, but it can be very expensive. It can be extremely expensive if you apply to 100, film festivals and they cost like $70 each to just submit to. You can imagine it adds up. And if you only get into, 10, 20% of those, and that's a good rate, it's a tough road. But with all the features I've done, we've played a nice handful of festivals around the world typically. And so then you're in a theatrical setting because a lot of the film festivals take over the local AMC theaters or, more independent like Regent Square Theater type environments. And that's not the same thing as having like a studio film with a theatrical release though.
Yeah.
So I have not had that kind of theatrical release with my films, but we did have with my film Woman on Fire got picked up for broadcast from the Stars Network. So that was like probably the most mainstream accomplishment I've had with distribution. But there's a lot of people involved to make stuff like that happen. You get sales agents, you get your producer. It's kind of intimidating but it's just one step at a time. I don't know if you're a filmmaker, but I really actually miss the early stages of filmmaking where you just get a camera and go and make stuff and put it online, maybe show it at, small film festivals. And like, that's the most rewarding to me is just connecting on that level, keeping it manageable.
Maybe, Julie, do you want to talk a little bit about your relationship? Because I know you worked with Animal on this project. So how did that relationship start? And maybe tell everybody who is not familiar with Animal, kind of who they are and how you got connected with them.
I get a little long-winded, but it goes way back. So my first documentary feature is called Aspie Seeks Love. And that film I made with just running around town with the Sony Handycam, following my friend David Matthews. He's a talented writer who has Asperger's syndrome and has been looking for love for a long time and was posting personal ad flyers to telephone poles looking for a girlfriend. And anyway, he asked me to make a movie about him, kind of this coming of age story about him getting this late in life autism diagnosis, trying to find love, trying to put out his first book. So I was working on that film and just like totally, I had no clue what I was doing. I had never made, a feature doc before. I had only done pretty amateur stuff prior. And just running around Pittsburgh with a little cheap camera and friends helping out. And I ended up applying for some grants, getting some grants. Steeltown gave me a grant too. Then I edited the film that I had and I had a rough cut and I was like, oh, this is pretty decent. Like, what do I do now? I don't even know. And Lisa Smith Reed, who used to be at Steeltown, she recommended that I talk to Animal, who had just done Blood Brother, which was their first documentary feature that they put out. And it took me a really long time to get a meeting with them and a lot of persistence. And finally I got a meeting and I was like, I really just have to pitch this, as best I can. And I managed to get their ear. At the time too, I had just done a documentary series called Healthy Artists that had just gotten coverage in the New York Times. So I was like, okay, I'm a little bit professionalized now. I can make a case for myself. But they took a look at the film and they liked the film and agreed to sort of mentor me because they had just gone through the whole, how do you finish the feature doc? It's one thing to create the rough cut, but now you've got to color it. You've got to do the audio correction. You've got to kind of get the DCP together and the press materials and go through the film festival route and try to sell the film and whatnot. So they helped me navigate all of that. And it had a nice, outcome and we enjoyed working together. And so the producer there, Danny Yord, who kind of took me on, said, do you want to do another film together? And of course I did. And so that's when I pitched them on Woman on Fire, which was about the first openly transgender firefighter in New York. And that film was slightly more professionalized than the last film I did, where they taught me how to use the Canon C300. And I did a lot of shoots where I would just go off to New York by myself and have like a microphone attached to the camera and do a lot of shooting that way. And for like important shoots, Danny Yord and John Pope, the cinematographer, would come out with me for more interview style setups. They would help out with that. And that film did well enough that they wanted to work with me again on Barefoot. And Olivia Vaughn, who I've worked with before, she helped produce that. She did Personas and she's an amazing producer. But Animal is very rare, like having done the film festival tour and talking to other filmmakers from around the country. Like whenever I tell people about Animal, they're just like, I've never heard of such an amazing utopian place. Like, and I've heard that from people who've, played Sundance, played the top festivals, who like struggle to get support for their films. Like, it's a really hard road to get your films made and get that support. So Animal has been a very rare opportunity, has provided that. So I'm very grateful. That's all I can say endlessly about Animal.
Yeah, they're definitely an asset to have in Pittsburgh and to have so close to us and so be so accessible. So just I think I have just one more question, and it's really on the technical side of things. So talking about how lighting and camera setup is different for documentary versus narrative, and then also sound, recording sound, and what are the differences between doing something as a doc versus narrative?
I don't do narratives. I haven't made a narrative before, but I understand the differences to some degree. And one is that you can get away with a lot more in documentary, which I appreciate because I'm not very technical. So as I was kind of mentioning with something like Woman on Fire or earlier docs that I've made, I would often be just like sitting there with like, a Canon C300 with the mic attached to it near the subject, and hopefully in a room that's not too loud, and do my interview that way and get verite footage that way. With Barefoot, things were, I guess, more polished, and we had more of a crew. So we would do shoots with our producer, Olivia Vaughn, would be on set to run sound and to be there producing. And so she would kind of be in control of making sure the sound was coming through and setting it up. And John Pope was our cinematographer, and he was shooting with a Sony FS7, and he had the assistant camera person, Mike Bacanu, there to help him set everything up with lights. And for a few of the shoots, we relied on natural light, which is just like, it's really tricky to do that. I don't actually like it because it puts you in that position of like, oh, we only have so much time and we're racing against time. And so for one of the shoots we did have a professional like grip guy come out with his truck and set lights up for us so we could just do interviews throughout the whole day and not have to worry about the light coming through the windows, which was really nice. But what I always kind of say is just like the most important things, and it's hard to say this, but like I think story is the most important. Having a great story and getting good quality audio is really important. People just won't listen to nails on a chalkboard. And sort of after that, the visuals are sort of after that, just because like people will not tolerate poor story and poor audio, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think all of our TAs share that opinion. We've all said that at one point or another to the students, like, you don't have good audio, you don't have anything. So yeah. So kind of moving away from the audio, but on the subject of sound, Gigi had mentioned music earlier and how it played a really impactful role in the storytelling. So talk about the music a little bit and how you got to what you had in the final product.
I had directed a documentary short called The John Show, where I collaborated for the first time with a composer named Ryan Will Stewart. And I was a fan of Ryan's work before. I had seen, I don't know if anyone saw the short film Echo Torch, which he composed the music for, Chris Prex's film. And so I knew about Ryan. He's local here in Pittsburgh. So we worked together on The John Show, and I was blown away by his scoring capabilities. And we worked together again on Barefoot, and he is like a genius. Like, I can't even tell you, because he did all of that himself. And he did bring in a few people here and there to do some extra guitar, but most of that was just him alone. And the film is like wall-to-wall music. So he just composed so much music for it. And we had moments where, he would give me a musical cue and I would say, actually, I don't think this fits. And he would just go and make another one. So like, there's even more music than what you see in the film that he created for the film. That's like on the cutting room floor. And I think, there were times where I would just like, I created a spreadsheet for the musical cues that I needed from him. And I would say, like, in this scene, I need these emotions to be coming through. And luckily, Ryan and I are good friends, and we could laugh together about how sort of cheesy my descriptions are, where I'm just like, I want this to be sweet and quirky, but also a little ominous. And like, I was giving him these impossible like descriptions, but he always made it work, because there's that tone to the film where it's like Mark is bouncing along and it's quirky and happy, and then the mood shifts, and he did that through his music. So if anyone ever has the chance to work with Ryan Will Stewart, please do. He's a genius.
That is good to know. I didn't know that we had such like amazing local talent when it came to composers. So cool. Yeah, and I've had people ask me before too. So it's good to have that reference.
I actually got to see the film at the Regent Square Theater in Pittsburgh, and ever since then, I just like think about Mark from time to time. I tell my friends about him and how impactful his story was for me. And so rewatching it, I really liked how you ended the film. The line he says about like Earth being heaven and trying to preserve it for the future. And I just really liked that message, even though of course it came from Mark and you chose to include it in the film. I think it was a great way to end the documentary.
Thank you so much. That's such a nice comment. And I appreciate you coming out to the Regent Square screening. And the final piece that Mark says that used to be earlier on in the film, and through having these rough cut screenings with friends and other filmmakers, one of my friends who's a filmmaker suggested that, said like, that's a really powerful quote. You should put that at the end. And I agree. Like it's just a great final period to the sentence kind of thing.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, and take care. Have a good night. Hopefully we'll get to see you live and in person someday, sooner rather than later.
That would be great.
Yeah. All right. Thanks
Be
so
safe.
much. Bye.
Bye.